Good day. Today I'll be discussing games and biology. Now, this is a very broad topic, but I would like to discern this by means of how video games affect us psychologically speaking, of which influences us in our decision making skills. Now, how does this work? Well, first, I will be tackling the bad and good aspects of consumption of video games or participating in them, of which I will then transition into giving three types or genres of video games and how they develop specific parts in our way of thinking that will influence us or supplement us in our way of decision making. Before we further go down to discussing video games and how they affect us, I will first be discussing the negative aspects, as the positive aspects will be further covered once I cite the three types of genres that will help develop certain parts of your brain. So, what are these negative aspects? One of them is in the physical aspect, which is a carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, what is carpal tunnel syndrome? Well, it looks like this. And what it essentially is due to constant movement, one of your nerves near your wrist would be compressed. It is a big nerve that will essentially limit your range of motion between your fingers, accompanied by lacking a numbing or burning feeling. On the mental aspect, one may develop an IGD or an internet gaming disorder, of which is essentially symptoms of someone becoming more preoccupied with gaming and essentially being very addicted to the point of sacrificing time with other activities such as socializing or other responsibilities. And here we will discuss the positive aspects by going through these genres. So first of the three genres that I'll be discussing is FPS, or first person tactical shooter, or essentially first person shooter games. Now, what does it mean? First person derives from the point of view first person, and shooter, which essentially means shooting. So what does it typically look like? Well, first person shooter games typically look like this and this. Now, these games essentially measure your eye-to-hand coordination or hand-eye coordination. Now, what this means is how fast do we respond to stimulus? How fast is the information that came from our eyes translated and discern the necessary action for our arm to what to do? An example of this in FPS shooters or FPS games is when you see a target. So our eyes externally has that stimulus that is a target, that understands it, sends the signal to our arm, and appropriately responds to it. How fast that works is very important, as it boils down as well to helping us in our reflexes. To supplement this, in a 2006 study, which was conducted by Bavelier and his researcher Sean Green, 9 non-gamers played Medal of Honor Allied Assault, an FPS game, for 1 hour for 10 days, while 8 non-gamers played Tetris for the same span, Tetris of which is a puzzle game. By training with the military shooter or the FPS game for less than 2 weeks, the non-gamers were able to improve their scores on 3 tests of visual attention, of which is very important for activities such as driving. Next is RTS. What does RTS mean? RTS essentially means real-time strategy games. Now, this can boil down to offline or online games, but it typically puts you in a more commander, as you instruct certain things to happen based on what is happening to your surroundings. Now, what this essentially trains is our temporal visual selective attention, and this is an example of which a study conducted by Dr. Dian Kun Gong, the Associate Professor in the Ministry of Education Key Laboratory for Neuroinformation at the University of Electronic Sciences and Technology of China, alongside his colleagues selects 38 volunteers of healthy young students from the said university. And as such, half of these students were experts in League of Legends, while the rest were not. All volunteers were seated in front of a screen and tested in a blink task. Now, what is this? The blink task is our tendency of being focused to blink, as it means we failed to properly register a visual stimulus if it appears so quickly after a previous stimulus that cognitive processing of the first has been finished. Let's say a color of blue flashes and followed by yellow, then green. Now what this means is if our brain was not fast enough to register the color blue, we might blink at the color yellow, and now we would only see the next color, which is green. Now, to quote by the result by Dr. Wei Yima, an assistant professor in human development and family sciences at the University of Arkansas, she states that we have found the expert League of Legends players outperformed beginners in the task, as the experts were less prone to the blink effect, detecting targets more accurately and faster, and as shown by the stronger P3B, gave more attentional cognitive resources to each target. Now this essentially means that playing RTS does improve a certain aspect in our way of thinking, which is our means of processing information. So one of the final things that I'll be discussing for the genres are puzzle games, of which in my opinion is one of the oldest forms of games that is not mutually exclusive to being a video game, but nonetheless a type of game that will help us in our decision-making skills. So, how does puzzle games do this? Well, it essentially trains our brain to develop problem-solving skills by way of memory. Now, how does this work is how our brain would constantly adapt to solve different types of problems and memorizing the commonalities or the similarities between each problems or the variables it presents. To supplement this, a video game study was conducted by an assistant professor, Michael D. Patterson, alongside with his PhD student, Mr. Adam Owe, as they test 4 different games for the mobile platform, as the research had shown that these different types of games do provide different types of benefits for the player that excel in them. And after all this, after 20 hours of gameplay, players of the Cut the Rope, a type of puzzle game, could switch between tasks 33% faster, and 30% were also faster in adapting to new situations. Alongside 60% of these players are now better in blocking distractions, as opposed to how they were before playing Cut the Rope. Now this, alongside the other games, have shown to improve our decision-making skills. And now, finally, to conclude my video essay, I would like to present some scenarios on how excelling in these types of video games can help you with your decision-making skills. So first off is FPS with hand-eye coordination. It essentially trains our reflexes. So what this can mean in decision-making is how fast we can quickly decide or how fast we can act once we have arrived at a certain conclusion of what we want to do. Next up is RTS with its temporal attention. Now what can this mean is how even under being overwhelmed by constant surge of information, we can still have or reach a conclusion quicker and more efficiently before getting distracted or essentially overwhelmed by said information. So it essentially makes us think quick on our feet, as we say. And lastly, puzzle games. So once you've solved this problem, or if you've gone through enough problems, you finally see the patterns between them. You memorize these patterns so that next time you encounter a problem, you could solve it quicker and at the same time adapting to future problems that may arise. All in all, video games do affect us psychologically and in some aspects physically. But as the saying goes, all of this can be done as long as we keep things in moderation. Thank you.